Welcome to what promises to be a very stimulating set of presentations and panels here at your Air Force Association Air Warfare Symposium. Now, our first panel today is on the topic of command and control, the foundational mission of the Air Force's 5 core mission areas. Because without effective command and control, the rest of the mission areas simply cannot be effective. Now, to address this topic this morning, we've got 5 expert practitioners for you, folks that have actually been there, done that, and have multiple T-shirts. So what I'm going to do is introduce you to them right up front to optimize their time with you and maximize time later on for your questions and discussion. Retired Major General Mark Matthews is the Vice President for Air Force Programs at Raytheon. Mark served in the Air Force 33 years and led the Hardin Theater Air Control Center in Korea, and later was J-5 Multinational Forces Iraq. Subsequently, as the Air Combat Command Director of Requirements, Mark led an Air Force-wide C-2 Tiger team exploring AOC missions footprint and force sizing. Next to Mark is retired Major General Kevin Kennedy. Kevin was wrapping up his Pentagon tour as Chief of Checkmate and Director of the Chiefs Action Group on 9/11. He was the first Afghanistan ace living in Kabul on 9/11/2007. And he commanded the Air Force's C-2 ISR Center. He's now working for Textron. Retired Colonel Mark Altobelli has been a division chief in Checkmate, commander of the 609th Air and Space Operations Center, acting commander and director of operations at the NATO Interim Deployable Combined Air Operations Center, and he was one of the strategy team members for the opening days of Operation Enduring Freedom, where I first had the opportunity to meet him. Alto now works for Boeing at Phantom Works. Retired Colonel Rob Evans is currently the Director of Strategy for Northrop Grumman Information Systems C-2 Division. He's been the Chief of the Air Staff Strategy Concepts and Wargaming Division and ran the Unified Engagement Wargame Series. Rob served in leadership roles in AOCs in Korea, EUCOM, and CENTCOM, and was a key member of the Air Force Marine Corps C-2 Tiger team. Now, our first speaker this morning is retired Colonel Rich Reynolds. In 1991, as an Air Force Fellow at Harvard, Rich wrote, "What fighter pilots' mothers never told them about tactical command and control." It's a good read if you have the opportunity to pick it up. Followed some years later by something that he wrote that's a little bit more well-known, Heart of the Storm, the genesis of the air campaign against Iraq, and that's also recommended reading. After retiring, Colonel Reynolds served as NATO's program manager for the Air Command and Control System Upgrade, and he's now an independent consultant working command and control issues. Now, to set the stage, we've put together for you a hypothetical scenario that we may face in the not-too-distant future. It's designed to illustrate some of the challenges that we may have if we don't rapidly adapt our command and control capabilities to be effective in a stressed environment, an environment very much different from that we've enjoyed the past quarter of a century. The video relates a hypothetical, let me underline that, sitrep from the air commander in Europe back to the Chief of Staff about a year in the future from now. So sit back and think about the implications from this. Please roll the video.
Dear Chief, if you get this message, let me begin by saying you were right and the rest of us weren't paying close enough attention. You quietly warned us at last year's Air Warfare Symposium in Orlando that the drop in the price of oil and gas, the Greek vote repudiating sanctions and belt-tightening, and the Russian leaders' political and military ambitions made for a very unstable and unpredictable Europe and an even more volatile Middle East. You saw things as they were. We saw things as we wanted them to be. It all unraveled so quickly. The Russian occupation of Estonia took place over 2 days using heavily armed, uniformed, but insignia-less Special Forces troops. Masquerading as Estonian patriots, they captured the entire German Eurofighter detachment, including fighter and support aircraft, at Amari Air Base, Estonia, whose mission it was to patrol the Baltic. I am told there are hundreds of POWs and some KIAs, but have no independent confirmation on exact numbers yet. This debacle occurred while Sakyr and the rest of NATO were trying to cope with the expansion of the shooting war in the Ukraine. Kiev fell as NATO debated who was responsible for this latest escalation and what to do about the plight of the German Eurofighters and crews imprisoned by these Estonian patriots. Greece added to the mix by insisting no additional sanctions be imposed on Russia until it could be proven beyond reasonable doubt that Russia was at the heart of those actions. It wasn't until early last week when 2 Dutch F-16s flying out of Malbork Air Base in Poland were shot down by a flight of 4 Su-27s escorting 2 Blackjack bombers over the Baltic that NATO awakened to the threat. Of course, Russia claimed the entire incident was a matter of self-defense and that the Blackjacks and their escorts were over international waters and had been repeatedly threatened by the Dutch Vipers. Sakyr asked me to send in additional U.S. fighters, and I did. Thanks to General Brad Smith of ACC and USAF, I was able to bring in 4 Raptors from Langley to ensure air dominance over that part of the Baltic should we be challenged again. It worked, for a while. As forces flowed into Europe per the TIPFID, Russia objected to what it referred to as NATO preparations for the invasion of the homeland and threatened to attack. We didn't think they would. We were wrong. When the missiles impacted the Ramstein AOC, I was there, along with 873 others. 500 more people were in the Allied command center next door. Russian aircraft hit us 50 minutes later. We lost half our planning staff and virtually all of the equipment that was above ground. The Allied command center is still operating, but our above ground and soft-skinned AOC has been obliterated. What were we thinking? I'm sending you this message from a place called Borfink, where we are reconstituting what is left of the AOC. You would be proud of how our airmen adapted rapidly to this new wartime reality and made this difficult move to Borfink. The place is a relic of the Cold War, but unless they start launching nukes, we should be able to operate successfully from here. Chief, what I need from you and the stateside forces is acknowledgement that reinforcements are on the way. I have to believe the 18th Air Force TACC in St. Louis and perhaps other critical control nodes, including yours, are under cyber attack because, despite the TACC's best efforts, we haven't been able to establish connectivity long enough to plan and move things as we must to fight and win. I've got unprotected C-17s and C-5s on the ground here in Europe with their crews ready and eager to go. But the question is, go where? Do what? Bottom line, I'm being forced to plan and fight with sporadic C2 connectivity up and down the chain. Word just came in confirming final preparations for multiple missile launches from the Middle East. They could hit us in less than an hour. Fight's on.
There you go. Thank you, General Abtula. The scenario that we just saw brings into focus both the fragility and criticality of command and control in wartime. The C2 systems that we use to implement our battle plans are woefully inadequate. Our air operations centers and KOCs are too large and unwieldy. Critical control nodes, like the Tanker and Airlift Control Center mentioned in the scenario, are single points of failure and thus lucrative targets for both cyber and kinetic attack. C2 assets need to be more nimble in the 21st century. They must find ways to operate in a distributed manner, allowing for graceful degradation in wartime and the ability to repair themselves quickly as the tactical situation unfolds. To be successful, C2 systems must provide commanders and combatants at all levels with the situational awareness and connectivity they need to turn plans into actions. How do we accomplish this seemingly Herculean task? We can begin by defining for ourselves what is command and control. For me, in the aggregate, command and control is the prevention and creation of strategic surprise. What's more, command and control is an action, not a thing. It's not an AOC or a KOC or a TACC. It's always been action, taken to prevent or create strategic surprise, and remains so to this day. In England during the Second World War, chain-home radars and controllers and pilots who used them prevented Hitler and his forces from achieving strategic surprise. Conversely, on December 7, 1941, a Japanese air armada created and achieved near-total strategic surprise against the United States when it sank a large portion of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The world has turned topsy-turvy since World War II. Back then, the only sensors on aircraft were the pilot's eyes. Now, fifth-generation aircraft bristle with sensors, allowing F-22s and F-35s to become, in General Deptula's words, FAEB, AE, and AWACS aircraft capable of performing a myriad of tasks that heretofore were done by fleets of specialized air and space-based assets. This offensive, defensive, multiple sensor aircraft revolution has blurred the well-defined lines of who does what to whom in the battle space and has left the C2 world yet to catch up. Put simply, we have failed to capitalize fully on the amazing new capabilities these aircraft bring to the fight. Major Matt Radar Getke, a Viper driver, laments this fact in a paper he wrote for the Air and Space Power Journal titled Crossing the Streams, Integrating Stovepipes with Command and Control. There he speaks of Afghanistan missions in which C-130's airdrop supplies while being harassed by small arms fire, unaware that armed predators were orbiting overhead and available to assist. In another case, Major Getke himself was flying armed reconnaissance, unaware an MC-12 in an overlapping orbit had found and fixed a high-value target, then the crew wanted it taken out before collateral concerns precluded weapons engagement. Unfortunately, the target went uncovered as Viper and MC-12 went their separate ways. There are many more examples of this egregious waste of air assets and opportunities. Major Getke argues for a 4-point, no-cost, immediate fix. 1, plan air power within a single AOC division and within a single AOC division as an integrated whole, not separate. 2, publish the plan in a single document. 3, group multiple platforms into a coordinated package and designate a mission commander. And 4, manage these packages at the AOC level with full C2 authority. Intriguing as these recommendations are, they do come with doctrinal and management costs, and unless implemented smartly, they could end up creating an even bigger, more lucrative target for our adversaries. Let me now turn to distributed control. This too comes with its own set of risks and flies in the face of human behavior. We are, after all, herd animals. We measure, test, probe, and judge people and organizations against all sorts of minute criteria before we extend them our trust. Trust requires presence. Trust in war requires even more presence. If you doubt this, ask the U.S. Navy command contingent who in the first Gulf War opted to stay aboard their flagship, the USS LaSalle, while their Army and Air Force counterparts hastened to Riyadh to join the Joint Force Commander, General Schwarzkopf, in his command center. The Navy leadership was to some degree marginalized by their lack of physical presence in General Schwarzkopf's headquarters. In closing, successful implementation of viable C2 systems for today's and tomorrow's fight against a peer or a near-peer adversary will require significant changes in the way we employ air and space assets. We must find ways to build trust and cohesion among and between combatant commanders and their staffs while allowing for the dispersal and survival of C2 systems and the people who use them. We must think and execute decisively today if our progeny are to survive and flourish as free peoples into the foreseeable future. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Good morning. I think you're probably going to hear some common themes from all the commentators today. I was, in preparing for this, thinking back to my time in Korea in the HTAC. If you've ever been to Osan Air Base, you would recognize the HTAC. It's this very large green block building that sits on top of a mountain, a very brown mountain in the wintertime. It's got trees painted on it. And as I used to walk up to it every morning, I used to wonder what the target folders from the North Korean Air Force must look like. It probably opened up and said, "Dear comrade, fly south, look for Brown Mountain, big green building with trees painted on it, bomb there." I used to think every time I walked in there, this has got to be the biggest bullseye in South Korea. And if the North Koreans had a nuke, this is the one target they were going to put it on. And if not that, several dozen, if not hundreds of Scud missiles laced with chemical weapons. Since then, resiliency in the Korean theater, our other AOCs, has improved, but as the video demonstrated, so has our adversary's ability to precisely target with conventional weapons in addition to weapons of mass destruction, and the capability potentially to decapitate our command and control, which would have devastating effects in many theaters, much as it would in Korea and others. So the threat has driven us to concepts of resiliency, dispersal, redundancy, but we're limited. We're not only limited by equipment, but as Rich just pointed out, we're limited by our people. Not everybody can be a commander. Operational art is a specialized capability which is developed over years of training and operational experience. It's in this context that I find notions of distributed control, or some may call it disaggregated control, especially interesting in how you might apply this in future conflicts. Concepts, I think, that we can learn from the commercial sector and adapt our command and control structure to. For example, I don't think it's necessary to replicate every command and control center and necessarily have redundant AOCs, but certainly the data fields, the data farms could be centralized and managed with a certain level of redundancy, much as we see in the commercial sector, connected by a robust, survivable series of architectures of communication nodes such as fiber optics or microwave or satellite communications, ones that would be difficult for an adversary to be able to disrupt or take out by attacking any single point, and also exacting a cost in terms of strategic cost if an adversary were, for example, forced to attack a location in the continental United States to take out the command and control of the United States. Connecting into this could be an array of mobile command and control sites. It could be ground mobile, much as the Marines have developed in their C2 systems and the Air Force has experimented with, or airborne, E8, E3, potentially even something carried on board a tanker aircraft or a cargo aircraft, again, much as the Marines do with their mobile DASC system. Simple, affordable tools would be part of this command and control structure, leveraging modern advances both in software and processing capability, which far outstrips anything that we ever have executed in the past, both within the AOC and on the airborne platforms. Coalition partners, similarly equipped, similarly acquainted with common doctrine and, again, training and procedures, but better enabled with a universal plug-and-play capability that translates their message sets into ours and vice versa, with the requisite guards there to safeguard critical security information. I think by doing this, we can drive to architectures which allow, again, a more robust architecture that allows, again, a distributed control mechanism when faced under a concerted attack by an adversary. But the question still remains whether the driving doctrine behind this should be centralized control and you degrade to distributed operations, or perhaps we should reverse that and look at distributed operations as a primary mode of execution that we scale up to large-scale conflicts in the future. I'm going to be the heretic and advocate the latter today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to debate this. Again, I think what's centralized are the databases, the software, the tools. What are distributed are more robust interfaces that allow a fusion of capability of our modern systems, much as the systems that we have on board fifth-generation aircraft, long-range strike bomber in the future, that allow a situational awareness that heretofore we've been unable to achieve. A situational awareness that we're able to distribute through a combat cloud structure that I think General Deptula is going to talk about during this conference, that enables disadvantaged users to have a common situational awareness. Under this scheme, large-scale operations, again, are built up by federating these capabilities, but nonetheless still centrally commanded by a single air commander. Inherent in this ability is to operate not only in degraded environments, but to operate more effectively in environments that become much more nuanced, like the last 15 years of counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operations that we observed. That was the great lesson I think I learned that Rich alluded to from my last year on active duty in Iraq. I saw the difference between the interaction between the theater commander and the ground component commander, who sat there daily beside his side, and the CFAC, who is necessarily geographically displaced, trying to execute an air war covering multiple theaters. It was just a different set of levels of trust, of confidence in the operations, and it resulted in a marked difference in the effectiveness I felt and the efficiency in the use of air power. I look forward again to discussing this with you this morning.
I'd like to just start with a concept of mobile airborne hubs, a concept of mobile maritime hubs, a concept that's not really a concept at all, it's in doctrine. It's called Universal Joint Task Lists that talk about critical pieces of work that must get done and who should do it. I'd like to talk about my last year. Well, it wasn't my last year. My last year was working a lot of joint requirements for the joint aerial layer. My last year really doing an Air Force job purely was being the Air Force ace in Afghanistan and the whole concept of distributed operations, some that Mark just referenced. I'd like to reference a Foreign Affairs article that talks about the importance of fiber optic cable that's under the sea. And I'd like to point maybe to the latest Aviation Week that talks about a airplane that went airborne for 80 hours straight. All those concepts blended together in this SITREP that goes back from the chief back to the person that was advocating what ComUSAF would say. So for you, General Goring, here's the chief's reply to you. Chance, nice spoof. I think the Russians actually fell for your disrupted comms military deception message. I know those first few post-attack hours were tough, but our high-altitude, long-endurance platforms went airborne just as planned, as soon as we saw the first indications of hybrid warfare attacks. Our joint aerial layer could certainly be more robust, but from all indications, it appears to have reestablished critical comms across all of the distributed control facilities. I know the reduced pipe size impacts you, but we will fix that as we establish more mobile airborne hubs and more mobile maritime hubs to support the damaged cyber-attacked facilities. Our new airborne C2 platforms are coming your way. Should be there within 24 hours and ready to go airborne at your demand after they are refueled. The classified distributed control exercises that you conducted last summer sure paid off. From our view, you have all of your distributed ops centers contributing just as you planned. Lake and Heath reports that they are full up and have your back in the UCOM theater, plus the split ops supported tasks are being fully staffed and managed from Langley, Scott, and other DCGS Air Force bases around the globe. The robusted cryptology we've put into our remote split ops RPAs is working. We haven't lost any caps yet. Don't worry, we're flying 5 to 10 orbits a day from airborne platforms just to ensure the airborne team has the right level of interface 4 levels of functionality over those systems, should the Russians try to steal any of them. I think our scrub of the Joint Mission Essential Task List and the Universal Joint Task List listings has all paid off. Our first battlefield test of centralized command, distributed control, and decentralized execution appears to be maintaining the proper balance between manpower efficiency support through split distributed ops, as well as wartime effectiveness, which can only be accomplished with some UGITL tasks done from the forward location, because trust does require personal presence. Nice job on laying out the proper linkages between your commander's intent and your Joint Air Operations Plan and this laydown that achieved this distributed ops. Finally, I think our decade in Afghanistan and Iraq taught us some superb lessons of how to effectively manage distributed control through the ACE structure, where an exquisitely shaped forward staff can move mountains, even when the bulk of their support is coming from distributed and split locations. I'm ready to move out on any shifts in this initial laydown that you need in order to support the changing conditions on the battlefield which only you can assess. I'll trade positions with you anytime. Fly, fight, and win. Chief.
Thank you very much. The scenario laid out is challenging, in many ways a back to the future, in both the scenario and the bolt out of the blue start. It reminds us all of the need to prepare, to train for a potential adversary that understands our doctrine, has seen how effective air power has been and can be through centralized control and decentralized execution. The American way of war has been predicated on ever-increasing levels of precision, connectedness, and an insatiable desire for more or near perfect intelligence. Adversaries have seen how we operate and will likely take a page from our own book using precision fires to attack previously uncontested aspects of the force, particularly our command and control system, both at the joint and component level. As the State Center discussed, these attacks can be kinetic or non-kinetic, adding to the fog of war. Command and control is not a career field, but two distinct parts. The commander is the individual given the authority and the responsibility to accomplish the assigned mission, and control, the mechanisms which provide the commanders the ability to understand the battle space, develop intent, guidance to accomplish the assigned task. Specified or otherwise, develops and transmits a plan to subordinates, monitors the execution, assesses the situation, and makes changes as required. The art of command comes from the commander. The ability to understand the situation, develop a strategy, campaign, and communicate its subordinates. The science of control are the tools and processes the commander uses to realize the strategy. There certainly is a rekindled enthusiasm for air command and control, and I would say it's about time. And some challenging the air power's well-practiced, proven tenet of centralized control and decentralized execution. In my opinion, the discussion of centralized command, decentralized control, and decentralized execution has been far too focused on the execution phase. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Lyle called this the tip of the iceberg in his thoughtful paper in Air and Space Power Journal last summer. He highlighted the many tasks associated with the functions of a JFAC and Commander of Air Forces. If we are to distribute control, do we mean the control of the execution? Or distribute all the planning to support the various boards, bureaus, and working groups that feed the joint processes and develop commander's guidance? If he does, how does the joint team plug in? Who do they plug into? This all can be solved, but as it solves one problem, it creates more seams. And it's not just an Air Force problem. The connectivity that the JFACs to speak to assigned forces is the same connectivity required to speak between components and from components to speak with their subordinate organizations. An attack on the communication system supporting a command and control architecture will not likely cut all communications to all sites. When looking at a contested environment, it will be critical to understand what is truly important, what is the minimum amount of information necessary to continue with the assigned task. Not the nice-to-haves, but the must-haves of information, where the information must flow. I posit the minimum is far less than the huge bandwidth our current command and control centers receive. Deconstructing the information exchange requirements will establish the size of the line of command and control. With this knowledge, a robust, resilient, diverse, and defendable communication network can be established to support the science of control. I believe preparing for contested communication environment centers on 3 T's: TTPs, tools, and training. Relooking at the existing TTPs, or techniques, tactics, procedures associated with the Joint Air Command and Control process, deconstruct them and identify what are the minimum information requirements, who needs to be, who should be, and would like to be connected, with the functions within what functions are ripe for distribution, what functions need to be centralized. This has all been looked at before. I remember when the generals came through the AOC and were telling me what we could do in the 609th forward and rear. So it's not new to look at what we can consolidate. but far too many people oppose any level of distribution and want it all in one single location, slowing the evolution of a flatter, more distributed control mechanisms. Several functions are ripe for action. ATO production and the dynamic targeting process come to mind quickly. Analysis here can establish and define the thin line of communication discussed earlier to point to the tools which will facilitate the architecture. For the tools, they must have the ability to have machine-to-machine connections. Again, nothing new, but these software tools and make sure the software tools are compatible are the standard. The hard part will be for the folks in the front couple rows to forge enlightened policies associated with multi-level security and associated exception to national disclosure policies working so we can work with our allies. The tool should focus on the ability to speed that data decision process everyone has been speaking about in the front line, so we can ensure we have adequate network management and we can clearly defend the thin line of command and control. TTPs and tools will not solve the problem by themselves. It will take an educated and trained force to conquer the challenges of a determined adversary. I'm not suggesting a new or a mandatory course, but refocus or return to our core of the existing education and training system that exists today. Air Command and Staff College, Air War College, the School of Advanced Air Power and Space Studies provide outstanding education, but perhaps we should recommit itself to the roots of the Air Tactics School and to focus on support of the Commander of Air Forces, the Joint Forces Air Control, and how we plug into a Joint Air and Task Force commanders. Beyond education, I believe the renewed emphasis should be placed on innovation of experiments with a focus of command and control and contested communication environment. Funny how you said brought up the same points. But just as the previous Joint Force Expeditionary Force Experiment Series events paved the way to improve dynamic targeting, a future JF-like construct could explore the different methods for distributing various C2 functions to determine what works best. In a time of constrained budgets, existing exercises can be used to focus on bits and pieces feeding to larger events. This is a challenging topic. There's no easy answer. But the road to advance starts with acknowledgement of the problem and aggressively seeking solutions. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'd like to thank General Deptula and the Mitchell Institute, the Air Force Association, for hosting this seminar and for choosing such a critical topic, command and control in the 21st century, beyond the AOC. I'm delighted to join such an esteemed panel to share some thoughts with you on this subject. The opening vignette, sobering as it was, highlighted two very critical points: the singular importance of our air operations centers and the increasing need for resilient and flexible command and control at the operational level. 24 years ago today, we were in the midst of the Desert Storm air campaign. Many of you in this room and on this stage played critical roles in that heroic effort, from pioneering killer scouts to air campaign strategists. The world witnessed the value of stealth and precision weapons, multiplied by the unity of effort and synchronization of operational level command and control, what's become known as the second offset. This was the birth of the modern AOC and the validation of the much debated JFAC construct. What will the next 24 years bring? We can imagine a fifth-generation force that can sense much more and much faster, building and sharing battle space awareness in what has been termed the combat cloud. We can imagine forces that will react with much greater agility, collaborating as teams and combining effects. Forces that can create and exploit opportunities, self-synchronizing, collaborating, combining in the battle space, generating initiative, overmatch, and ultimately victory. This will be the third offset. Taken together, the increasingly sophisticated threats and significant advances in the capabilities available to air component commanders will present both challenges and opportunities for operational level command and control beyond the AOC. Modern and emerging technologies allow us to view C2 challenges differently and develop innovative solutions that were unimaginable only a few years ago. Just consider the advances in the phone that you probably carry, that you use to check your email and surf the internet and watch Netflix and occasionally maybe make a phone call. Things like cloud computing, highly collaborative workflows, enterprise data strategies, ubiquitous networking, all of these are changing the foundations, the technical foundations of command and control. And they're providing new pathways for innovative concepts leading to more resilient and more flexible operational level command and control. Propelling all of these changes is the unrelenting velocity of information. Speed of command will determine operational level outcomes in future warfare. A force wields power based on its capability and the opportunity to act. Opportunity results from circumstances and the authority to act. A fifth-generation force will possess enormous capability and will create opportunities for action. But those opportunities cannot be realized without the authority to act. Mission success will depend upon the realization of power, effects massed at decisive points in time and space. Clearly, fifth-generation command and control will be as essential as the fifth-generation platforms themselves for success in future warfare. At the core, the modernized AOCs, the geographic AOCs in particular, can serve as the cornerstones of a broader command and control enterprise, spanning from functional command centers providing global effects to forward C2 elements, including AWACS and JSTARS, managing tactical execution. Three elements will be key. First, operational flexibility. A scalable and tailorable command and control enterprise will enable air component commanders to array their capabilities to best meet the mission requirements across the full spectrum of operations. Concepts like disaggregated C2 and distributed control can enhance collaboration and prepare subordinate commanders to execute the commander's intent while maintaining the initiative in contested or degraded environments. Secondly, operational depth. By leveraging forward commanders, the JFAC can bridge the gap between theater AOCs and forces executing at the tactical edge, thereby increasing resiliency and reducing the dependence on the singular AOC. In degraded environments where only a thin blue line of communication gets through, the JFAC can transmit the most critical data, his intent to empower commanders in the fight to maintain the initiative. It's mutual support at the operational level. And finally, operational agility is the continuous sensing, understanding, and reacting to significant changes in the battle space to ensure that no opportunity for exploitation is missed and no emergent threats are left unanswered. Operational agility is not driven by a cyclic battle rhythm, but by the dynamics of a constantly changing battle space. Simply monitoring the execution of the ATO will be insufficient. To close, let me say that I believe future air warfare will be more engagement-oriented, driven by strategy, but focused on rapid, near-continuous planning cycles and dominant execution. Success will depend on collaboration between joint entities, distributed decision-making, and the arrangement of capabilities in real time. The desired effects and outcomes expressed in the commander's intent will become the most important products of the AOC, and the means to achieve those ends best trusted to those with the highest awareness and the most agility to react. Information will become the new coin of the realm, and resilient and flexible operational level command and control will be essential for victory.
Well, thank you, panelists. I think all of you would agree with me that the comments quite clearly evidence a need to modify the magnificent command and control systems that we already have today, but it is time to adapt to a more resilient and flexible set of processes and procedures. I want to thank the panelists for keeping the remarks tight, so we have about 10-15 minutes for questions. And the first one is been posed for you, Rob Evans, and that is, how do you envision AOCs changing in the future, and should they?
That's a great question. The answer, as I learned years ago at the weapons school, is it depends. Beyond that, I say yes. I think they should change. They have to always evolve. The threat is constantly changing, and I think maybe three categories that could frame what might be the changes for command and control, and they were all alluded to by the panelists this morning. And the first is a refocusing on command. And so when we talk about command and control, we really do need to separate those concepts. And the AOC, I've heard some describe it in ways that makes it sound like a factory that produces products that could be done offshore perhaps, products like the ATO and the ACO and so on. And all those things are true, but it's also the commander's command center. And I think that aspect of command in a dynamic environment will become more and more important for AOCs in the future. The second is an enterprise view of command and control writ large. So we really need to get beyond thinking about singular AOCs or magnificent buildings and think about the enterprise of command and control that supports not only commanders with global responsibilities, but also theater air component commanders. And some of the concepts we talked about touch on that. And then finally, the third element, I think, is speed. I think our AOCs have got to evolve to be much more agile in the application of air power at the operational level. And so I think things like machine-to-machine data passing, I think highly collaborative workflows, I think the inclusion of elements at the forward edge into operational level decision-making will all be essential for the future AOC. And I think the good news is, as the Air Force modernizes and takes advantage of those technologies, I think all of those lines of effort are achievable.
Very good. This one's for the panel in general. And is very pertinent. How would we incorporate key coalition strategic partners into the evolving distributed control operational strategy?
I alluded to that in my remarks. I think that we already have prototype systems that we've demonstrated with the capability, certainly with NATO allies, of taking message sets and essentially acting as a universal translator to bring their ATO information into U.S. systems and vice versa, again with relevant guards in there to make sure there's not releasability of critical national-only information in both directions. You can continue to further evolve that, certainly with coalition partners such as in the Middle East and other countries that we work with on a routine basis. We had this in Korea, as a matter of course, on Rail Rock, for example, type information. We do this on bilateral agreements. What I think we need to evolve to, though, is, again, more of a concept of a universal type translator. And again, as with continued advancements in the software and the technology, I think that is an achievable position, especially with the people that we routinely train with. And then that becomes, again, a basis of training and exercising elements of command and control. I think it becomes important for us also, again, when we look at trying to create this infrastructure, this resiliency that we've all been talking about here today, the ability to plug into other countries' command and control systems and their architectures, often cases more advanced than ours in terms of what they've invested in, and we should be able to leverage that, especially their sensor networks and again, the processing as well as the data storage capacity in there. It does require some overarching element of designing an architecture, the appropriate interfaces, the standards to go do that. But working from a U.S. perspective, especially with our position in the world, I think we can establish that kind of architecture.
Very good. Anyone else? Okay. And another challenging one for you, for the panel in general. How can the Air Force address its command and control challenges when organizationally there is no single entity or command responsible for command and control equipment, training, and doctrine? I thought Kevin might pick up on this since he's the former commander of the C2ISR Center.
I think this is on. We're all a victim of our own experiences, but I honestly don't know how they can do it. Without somebody leading or at least consolidating all the different perspectives from all the different MAGCOMs, I don't know how you can get the right perspective on this. As the C2ISR Center Commander, and really the last one that was there before we downsized it and kind of blew up the mission set, I saw a very significant difference between the challenges that TRANSCOM and AMC fought every day versus the challenges that the CAF fought every day. But I'll tell you that I would suggest that the AMC model and the network that they built around the globe does a wonderful job of handling phase 0 and even phase 1 type of activity. It also does a very good job in phase 4 and phase 5, which is where we've been for the last decade. So I would suggest that the AMC model of trying to have global connectivity that has core, if you would, cloud nodes in every theater of the world and then shares data between them to keep it low latency information readily available is a very useful approach. And then add to that the tightened requirements that the CAF has, which I think gets into this mobile airborne hubs, mobile maritime hubs, and distributed control that we were talking about, is a very smart way to go forward. But again, I think you need at least some champion to pull that together.
Anyone else? Rich?
I think that in my view at least, there's a danger in making a champion of the command and control problem. When you make a champion, at least it's been my experience in large organizations, everybody else breathes a sigh of relief and say, thank God, I don't have to do that. Somebody else is going to do it for me. And then you get into a situation where you have CommuSafe and others who suddenly find themselves, wearing 4 stars and going, my God, I've got a combat role here. How do I do that? And you kind of close your eyes and go, I go into this AOC or some room somewhere, and I meet with a lot of people, and they're making a lot of noise, and I can't really understand what's on the board because there's too much junk on the board to begin with, and you hope that the exercise will be over shortly. I think that it's got to be a cultural change where you say it's everybody's problem. I mean, the reality is that you don't need a special career field. If you're going to be a somebody somewhere, sometime, as you're making your way through the ranks, you've got to understand that you have to be able to command, and your commands have to get through somehow. And we need to test that. We've gotten very good over the last decade of prosecuting wars in which you're in a low-threat environment, and we're dealing with terrorists. We're not dealing with peers or near-peer adversaries. It's a new world. And I think we have to wake up to it. And if I were sitting in any of those chairs with these august leaders, I would be thinking about that. You'll end up just like poor General Schwarzkopf when he thought he was retiring at MacDill. And the next thing he knew, he was taking on a really big war.
Okay, thanks very much. First, let me compliment the audience. The questions are awesome. We're running up on our time limit. I would encourage you, if I don't get to your particular question next, which will be the last one, to grab these folks in the sidebar when we have a break to get them to answer your question. So here's the last question. Effective distributed and adaptive operations require lethal authority to be pushed to very low levels out in the field. Within the current Air Force, Joint, Department of Defense, and White House levels, is this allocation of authority even possible? Alto.
Well, I think it is. I think it is possible, because I think many years ago someone told me that when you're looking at a problem, that there's a lot of smart people in the room, and if they can get their hands around the problem themselves, then they tend to try to do that. So when they're looking at the problems, they go, I can handle this, and they continually try to restrain it. And you have to ask yourself, where are the good examples of that? Well, I was talking with the J-Star crew at the last AFA convention, and he was lamenting about, again, this lack of authority. But then I asked him, I go, well, what happened when it occurred with you? He says, well, I took a chance during the Libya operations. He said, took a chance. He took the opportunity, and he started directing. I said, well, when you landed, Did you get pulled aside and beat upside the head? Said no. They said thank you. So the authority was pushed to them, and they were able to execute. So we tend to look for all the cases where authority's been withheld. But there's plenty of times, and they're out there, where authority's been pushed down and successful. And I would say the reason why we're doing that potentially is because the pace is not there. And sooner or later, we're going to get in a situation where the pace will not allow us to retain it. So yes, the authority needs to be pushed forward. And the ways we train our folks is during different exercises and experiments to allow them to breathe and have that chance to see what happens.
Very good. Thanks, Alto. To wrap this up, let me highlight that new capabilities and concepts of operation like that of the Combat Cloud are going to require new methods to command and control them. Now, for the last 6 months, the Mitchell Institute, in conjunction with some of the Air Force's leading-edge thinkers and doers on the topic of command and control from the Air Staff, MAJCOMs, the Air Force Research Laboratory, along with industry, think tanks, and academic representatives, have participated in several workshops to identify ways and means beyond large centralized static command and control facilities to capitalize on mobile distributed command and control with capability to handle the same volume and density of information as a regional AOC today. Their findings are being assembled in a white paper that will be released in the not-too-distant future, and it's guaranteed to be defining for the kind of agile distributed command and control that's going to be necessary to meet the challenges of our future. So please join me in a round of applause for our panelists, and thank you very much for your attention. Our next panel is on long-range strike, and it will begin in 5 minutes. So if you would, please take a break in place, and we'll reorganize the stage.